Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. How's it going? Tonight, I've got a kind of a treat. I've been wanting to do a presentation for quite a while. I don't get much of a chance to, and at night, it seems to be the way to go. So, you're going to have to excuse me. I won't be able to watch the comments section that much because I've got like lots of different things open so I can throw them on here and give a visual presentation. Good to see Standing for Truth right here in the live chat. Good to go. Um, I didn't really know what I was going to touch on. I actually wanted to specifically touch on one topic and make this short, but instead I'm going to do three because in my comment section, I notice I get three questions in particular, and they come out quite sarcastic. So we're going to start off with the number one thing, and that is Australia in general. Pretty much all the questions are regarding Australia, as funny as that is. It's usually flat Earth, actually, and then after flat Earth, it comes down to Australia. And the number one thing is this right here. You want me to believe that a kangaroo and marsupials, and specifically kangaroos, hopped all the way from the Middle East into Australia, where we find them now today. Okay, now, first of all, I would like you to first think about what does our model say and what does it predict? Now, for the general person, they would say, that's a good question, right? Well, that also comes down to the idea that Noah's Ark actually landed here. Yes, that is the presumption that somewhere on Mount Ararat, because Mount Ararat is described in the Bibles where the Ark landed, but Mount Ararat, what it is today, is a volcano, and it's been named that because of what it actually is, and it just means the highest land mass. And in Arabic, it's Mount Judi or Mount Kudi. That's how they pronounce it, which is actually a little bit to the south, and that's where the Muslims place where the Ark landed. So it just comes down to what they believe in their own language means where it landed. So this is the general idea of where it is. I like to go out and say, actually, if we go by what the Bible describes, we find that the ark landed somewhere to the east of Shinar, which is modern day Babylon. So if that were the case, then the ark actually landed in the east regions of that. Mount Judi and Mount Ararat are to the north. So that would be impossible to journey from the east, which would have placed the ark landing somewhere above in the north of India along the largest mountain range in the world, where Mount Everest is. So I would like to say that we have to be able to explain these animals right here, and how would they have gotten to an area like Australia in our model, right? I mean, we have to be able to explain and say, all right, these creatures, they look kind of small. How are they going to maneuver? Well, you have to ask yourself, after the flood, what was happening? Well, it talks about the waters receding for months and months, going back down. So when the ark landed, the ocean is right there. So there's going to be debris floating along, and it's going to be landing on the currents are going to be flowing from there. And a lot of these animals are very small. They're easily going to be taking these currents with debris. And where do currents go? Well, currents on our planet run the ocean from the ocean. They run down to the equator or up to the equator, and they match the equator, and then they flow out from that, and they flow to the east. And the reason they flow this way is because of the Earth's rotation. So what will happen is that if there's debris, it's going to come down, and it's going to catch the currents, and it's going to drift to the east, which is going to take it in what direction? Right to Australia. So the water levels are going down, and animals are going to be distributed wherever they come into contact with a landmass. Well, the first landmass it's going to come into contact with would be in that region, those islands that are right there, and Australia itself. So we don't have to really explain that too much. And then you got to also remember that once you take water out, which would have been after the flood, you can see, NASA did this, by the way, they took some of the water down, and you can see very easily right here, animals could have easily walked to every landmass that there was after the flood. So it makes migration answered in a very, very easy way right after Noah's flood, because the water levels directly after the flood would have been draining and going down into what's the Bible describes as returning to the great deep. And then they were locked up. And then afterwards, after about 1,000 years, there was an ice age. The ice age started to end. and the glaciers and ice started to melt, and the water levels started to rise again. And after they rose, places like Australia here, as you'll be able to see the beginning now, as you know today, is isolated. It's trapped. Those animals that are stuck on there are now isolated like they are on the islands in between. So for our case, we have to say that, like, how would a kangaroo then, it's not catching debris, and that's true. We would actually say that it would be much easier for something like a kangaroo to migrate from this area. If you can see, move over. Yes, you can see my mouse. So if the ark landed here, obviously this seems like the best region because Noah could see mountaintops. And if he actually landed on Mount Ararat, he couldn't see any mountaintops because it is the highest mountaintop in all of the region. So clearly he landed somewhere else. I think it was over here because the Bible again describes that they migrated to the east, which was over here to get to Babylon. So if the ark landed here, guess what? It's not that far to go down. And what do we have? Do we have any evidence? Or am I just saying random things without any evidence whatsoever? No, we have evidence of kangaroo outside of Australia in ancient cave art of all things. So we see this in India. And if specifically where in India, it's a different province that makes it kind of is centralized in the eastern side. And guess what? This was during a supposed ice age, right? So we're looking at a supposed ice age, which was, again, about 1,000 years probably after the flood, when it came to an end. And ancient man living in India saw kangaroos and drew them directly on art that's visible that we have today in a totally different continent. Remember, marsupials have supposedly been trapped on Australia. So what are they doing outside of Australia? They're not supposed to be there. So clearly they lived, and clearly they died off. Either man killed them or they were on their way. They were journeying and they were migrating to Australia during that time. And somebody saw and went, wow, that thing is extremely peculiar. I've never seen anything like that. So he drew it down. He drew what he saw. And then later, as time went on, mankind just forgot about it. They didn't see them anymore as they migrated into Australia, and they just became trapped. And it wasn't until man eventually migrated and left Africa until they were traveling around and taking rafts and boats in different areas and exploring the world. Because remember, after the Babel dispersion, people were going to new lands. They were exploring the world. Going north was a disaster. It was still ice and cold and horrible. And then you get over to Australia, it's pretty good. It's warm, it's tropical. Same thing with Africa. Both really good regions of the world at that time. And same with India. So whoever migrated into Australia, they would have gotten trapped. Very similar to how people would have gotten trapped in Australia or Africa because of the Sahara Desert. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So that would explain how we would talk about migrations of animals and their patterns on how they would have been dispersed after Noah's flood and how they would have gotten to some strange places and become trapped based on sea level, what was happening during the flood. So the question of, do you believe that all these marsupials just ran over to Australia all the way from the Middle East? No, I don't believe any of that scenario. So that explains that one. The next one would be, why are animals so different from their neighboring land masses? Now, this one's going to be an interesting little explanation and story, so I hope you guys are going to like it. It comes down to something called the Wallace line. You can see it here on the map. As a matter of fact, I'll throw up another one so you can just visually see it. You can see the Philippines to the north right over here, and a row of islands like Java right here. And then to the bottom of the screen, which is down here, you're getting into Australia again. Now, this Wallace line is actually this man right here. Oh, that's quite a small picture. I can't even zoom in. So this man is Alfred Russel Wallace. He lived at the time of Charles Darwin, about the 1850s. He was traveling around the world at the time, and he was documenting all of the different animal species. And he was fascinated by how different they were on different parts of the world. But one thing was really, really peculiar to this guy is that he noticed that if you were all the way in Europe and you went to Japan, the animal species visually looked like they were related to one another. Like you could tell there might have been some color differences or a little bit of a shift, but overall you're like, those are the same species. But yet at the same time, in animals that lived in Java, like as you can see right here, and Bali, you directly go right across this line, and now the species completely change, and they're very different. Matter of fact, they're unrecognizably different. Most of the species that are on this side of the line only belong to the Australian species, and all of the species on the other side belong somewhere else, to another demographic which is associated with Asia. So they were very perplexed at, like, he was like, what's going on here? So because he believed in evolution, he had his own thoughts going on at the time, because this was the new principle going around, that animals were evolved, and they all have their own placements on different lands, right? Like Darwin was talking about, well, they just adapt to their own environment. So Australia must have been on its own for a very, very long time. This was the evolutionary idea, right? Australia was attached to the South Pole, and it broke off and shifted up, and animals slowly evolved during this situation, isolated on the island, and then it slammed into the ground right over here in this region, right? And had its own plate. And then the upper region, the Sumatra and Borneo and the Philippines, broke off from Asia, and they believe that those species had been evolving. So when they came together, the two plates, they each had their own species demographic, and so they never really crossed over one another. That was their theory. Ours makes a whole lot more sense. So we can explain this much, much better, because what we have when we look at this Wallace line, by the way, this is actually where it runs through. You can see from Bali to Lombok right here is actually a visual representation. As you saw at the very beginning of this, you can actually look from Bali to Lombok and you can see it. But yet the animals can't get from there to here. Very unique concept, right? It's literally a dividing line between animal species that don't really have any relation with one another, nor do they have a relation to their evolutionary common ancestor. So that was even more shocking to them. They said, what's going on? Why is this happening? Why is Australia so isolated and so different? It must be because of evolution. It must be because of deep time. So what happened is Wallace, documenting all of these different things, he said, okay, what are we really seeing here? What's really going on? Why is the biodiversity here, not on the other side? Can we explain this? So he really didn't try to, other than saying, well, this dividing line exists. It's an invisible line, but yet it's a real line, and it exists because of evolution. And it exists probably because of the evolutionary time frame for species to evolve. And now that they can cross and they can probably meet one another, they can't breed with one another because evolution is true and they can't breed with one another anymore. So species are that diverse now. He's completely wrong in that. What I mean by that is this line that exists. Do that. This is the region right here, and the reason the line actually exists is hold on. I thought I could loop it. Never mind. I can. So this region right here is where it runs. And you can see the water current is extremely high, the wind is extremely high, and the waters are extremely deep. So because of those three reasons, animals can't swim across, and birds and insects can't fly across the line. So they literally can't physically pass the line. But you know what's unique? Humans can. Guess what? They found that Denisovan, which they classify as a subspecies, but we know as creationists, these are just normal human beings. They actually navigated right through the line, not even knowing that it was there, nor that it existed. Why? Because we're humans. We have boats. We can navigate. We can think clear. We're not animals. And we go right through things as though they don't even exist. And the Wallace line is no different at all. So animals cannot pass it. Human beings can. The line is there. It's always existed after the flood, and the reason it exists now is because when the water level dropped down and receded, that area was specifically very deep, and the wind is extremely high, and because of the wind, the currents are extremely strong. So any animal that tries to swim it dies. They cannot navigate past it, and any insect that tries to, they go right into the ocean and drown, so they'll never be able to cross it. It's not because of evolution and deep time. It's because the border that exists is an invisible one, and we couldn't see it and we couldn't understand it, but now we can. And not only can we do it, we've actually navigated the entire region to 3 specific locations where species have somewhat tried to intermix, but they each have their own demographic layer that they've adapted to in those regions. So very unique, very different. I thought I would put that one kind of out there because it's very unique. And then also, we have to be able to explain, like, the ice age and animals that are also in it. And I will be getting to that one in a minute, because the next question that's going to come up would be, man, look at all these. I've gone through a little too much, but I digress. The third one would be, how do so many geographical specific species distribute so quickly? All right. So first of all, animals adapt to their environments, and they adapt to them very rapidly. That's why when you were to take even human beings that could have been very tan and dark around in a region like the equator, and then they go up to Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, they really quickly get very white skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair, and it doesn't take very long. The same thing applies to animals, right? You can take a bear, like a brown bear and a black bear. They introduce them into the polar regions, and they become a polar bear very, very rapidly through hybridization. And this can happen within a few generations. It doesn't take millions of years, like they're saying, through slow beneficial mutations. These adaptations are from these allele changes, which happen through recombination and gene conversion on rapid changes. So we see that going out in that branching pattern happen rapidly. It happened quickly in species, especially like butterflies and flowers and certain insects. They happen really, really quickly. So what happens is, we believe that as the world would have been flooded, it would have been completely empty. So it's a prime environment for animals getting off and now migrating and filling an empty earth. We talk about punctuated equilibrium because we see species having no restraint in an empty world. And now it's just not a world where there's polar regions of cold and then one island landmass in the middle that's tropical, where all life would have been in one type of region. Now we have deserts and forests and really tropical areas, and then ice and snow. We have so many strong demographical layers that animals are now adapting to these cool environments at a rapid pace. So they're speciating, and they're now adapted to those things. So people think that Noah had like a camel on the ark, and the camels are now only isolated to deserts. So how did that happen? How was an animal like a camel getting out and surviving where they were? Well, that's not what we see, actually. Animals like camels exist all the way up in northern Russia, where they exist in the snow, and they also survive in the Sahara Desert extremely good as well. So we see them surviving in all kinds of conditions. So it's an amazing adaptation based on the animals that would have been on the ark would have been extremely heterozygous. So they would have had a lot of built-in genetic diversity, kind of like we see with the mouflon sheep. All of the other sheep we see in the world today came from them, which would have been on the ark. So when you take them and you place them on an island, they can thrive and they can branch out and do very good. But you try to do that with a Chihuahua, it's not going to do very good, because over time it's lost a lot of that heterozygous features, and now it's more homozygous. It's lost its genetic diversity. If there was a flood in 100 years from now, when God was sending animals on an ark, he would never be sending the Chihuahua or the pug, because it would be an extinction of that line of canines. He would again be sending the wolf. So species diversity because of us is very much different. And a lot of people say, well, humans didn't live really during an ice age. Humans evolved only 200,000 years ago. And you're talking about these animals living during an ice age. And we would say that actually we have tons of evidence of this. Here is a story that you can find in the Indian epics. And they talk about a king that went into a land in India, and he noticed a guardian palace where their king lived, and it was guarded by elephants that had 4 tusks. Well, guess what? Those elephants supposedly died off 2 million years ago, and no human has ever seen one before, because they died during the ice age. Yet we have confirmation that somebody saw them and documented them and wrote them down. They visually saw these things. And now we know that these are something that we only see in the fossil record, and human beings saw them. They literally witnessed these things and documented writing them down. And we find these a lot with ancient cave artwork, right? They depict giant ice age creatures. So clearly human beings saw these things. They witnessed them. We have evidence that they ate some of them. And here's one, mastodon and giant sloths. We know that when they hunted giant armadillo, they would bonk them right on the top of the head with a giant hammer and then tip them over and then come back when they were dead. That's how they hunted those. Yet those are supposedly died off in the Ice Age, right? We know that they hunted mammoth because we've had multiple examples of them finding carvings on their bones from scraping the meat off of them. We have cave art hunting them. We have a giant sloth. We know that giant sloth were a unique creature that the arrows couldn't pierce their skin. We hunted and killed them. We also have their tracks next to human beings at exactly the same time. So we do have evidence that human beings were alive at the same time these creatures were. So how we explain their diversity, how we explain their how they speciated, how they moved across the environments, where the animals came from, how they migrated off of the ark. And I think we were able to answer all of those tonight. So just kind of a random quick live stream I wanted to do. We've been working on projects like usual, and this was one that I was writing up, and I figured, you know what, let's just talk about it. Let's go through it, because I doubt a lot of people have ever heard of the Wallace line. And it's an amazing thing that exists that most people don't even know about, nor have ever even heard about. And it's, I think, more great evidence of the biblical creation model and how we would explain how animals can migrate somewhere, water levels can rise, they become isolated, and now they can't even escape. And even when they try to escape, there's other natural barriers that are preventing them to go back, and why you see a lot of specific species landlocked on different islands or land masses that evolution claims this is great evidence for evolution. In reality, it's a horrible explanation, because if they try to explain, oh, those adapted on Australia over millions of years, well, no, they didn't, because none of their common ancestors are in the South Pole. Where are they when you go to Antarctica? They need to be there, right? If Australia broke off of Antarctica and it started moving north, you need to say that all those marsupials are from Alaska, right? So where are they? They're not there. So their story makes no sense. It comes to a dead end very quickly. And when you try to look for those species, or the ancient fossil, or the ancient ancestor of those, like they would say from evolution, they're not there. They're not down there. They're only in Australia. What does that tell you? We find evidence of them in other places, going to Australia, and then we find them only in Australia. What does that tell you? That's exactly what our model would describe, and how we would predict it, and what we would expect to find. It's contrary to evolution. So it's obvious what happened. It's so clear to us. Evolution has to backpedal and come up with these crazy explanations on why things are this way, and they just don't fit. The puzzles don't match. They're trying to force fit the data. Ours is just right there. It's amazing. We don't have to retrofit anything. So I might go live again. Probably do it for members, because I hate that people are becoming members and then I don't give them any special content. So I will do members only live stream after this. I hope you guys liked it, and I will close it up. Keep this one nice and short. All right, everyone. Until next time.